have a panel discussion that we'll go into immediately, and the panelists are focused on the pillars of South African democracy, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We've also, instead of having the fourth pillar, have decided to bring in representative of civil society. Oh, the fourth pillar is the press, but that's unofficial. We are instead going to have a representative of the faith-based organizations and what is generally referred to as grassroots communities. We'll have a representative from Abahlali baseMjondolo. I'll ask that the panelists also talk for almost not more than 10 minutes. 8 minutes is the set time for intro to set the scene of the dialogue, and then we'll have an interaction, a mini interaction among the panelists themselves, responding to each other's comments when necessary. After that, we'll open up to the House to interact. To do this properly, me and my colleagues have asked a few respondents to prepare themselves. So I have a list of those respondents who will kick in after we've dealt with the panel. And the House, because it has been arranged in such a way that most of us who are invited here have a view to express, will give each other an opportunity to express those views when necessary. I obviously have time limitations, so I make this disclaimer that if in any way you feel we have not been fair to yourselves in making inputs, we apologize. It's in the nature of dialogues that I make this disclaimer in advance, because you can never be 100% perfect. We have perfect imperfections. Now I'll get into it. We have representing the executive Ayesha Johaar on behalf of the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Honorable Ronald Lamola. She's here. Huh? Oh, yes. Sorry. So we'll have you talking. You can talk.
Good evening, Program Director, distinguished guests. Program Director, our ultimate goal as the people of South Africa is to achieve and maintain a society based on democratic values, social justice, and human rights. Government is assigned a large portion of the responsibility to achieve this goal. It does so, in the first place, by strictly adhering to Section 85 of the Constitution, and secondly, by giving effect to its constitutional and other statutory obligations in a manner permitted by law. It is obliged to translate all of the rights provided for in our Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, into tangible outcomes to which everyone is entitled. The development and implementation of government policy and programs are intended to be the vehicle through which this translation is achieved. Government action has not gone without criticism by many communities and organizations and by the other arms of state. It has experienced challenges in the implementation and the application of the very laws it has initiated. This must be and is acknowledged. In this context, Program Director, government has had to honestly evaluate its work over the past 25 years As a result, it has renewed its commitment that none of the constitutionally enshrined rights can be realized without the meaningful participation of all in South Africa in all of its formations. The commitment to include all of South Africa in designing, achieving, and maintaining our ultimate goal has led to government taking the initiative to seek partnerships in order to deliver in the best manner and within the shortest possible time the fullest enjoyment of our fundamental rights. These initiatives extend to areas of research, policy development, and program delivery. By way of example, what started out in 2014 as an ad hoc rare occurrence has become what government desires to be the norm. In 2014, government and the South African Youth Council signed the declaration of the Presidential Youth Indaba during 2014, which commits to the Youth Development Accord as the framework for our youth empowerment. 2018 saw the appointment of experts from outside government to advise it on land reform and agriculture. The National Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, held in 2018, and the signing by government, business, labor, civil society, academics, and health associations of the Presidential Health Compact earlier this year. This instrument records not only the concerns relating to, but also the commitment of all of us as signatories to the improvement of the quality of public health system and access to healthcare. Program Director, from this perspective, it can be said that entering into partnerships with stakeholders and experts demonstrates government's desire to appropriate for itself the key values underpinning the Constitution. Consultation, collaboration, and partnerships are considered a desirable approach to achieve the goals set out in our Constitution. Government action through its administrators must be carried out in accordance with the principles set out in the Constitution. The first instruments which codified these principles for a public service was enacted and implemented way back in 1994. But it did demand from those to which it applies a standard of acceptable conduct. Our Code of Conduct for the Public Service was agreed to by government and the associations which represent the interest of our administrators. But, Program Director, government has resolved that more is and was needed. This led to the development and the initiation of the Public Administration Act, which purports to promote the values and principles governing not just the public service, but the entire public administration. It sets out to regulate the practice of administrators conducting business with the state. It provides for capacity development and training, and it establishes an important body known as the Ethics, Integrity, and Disciplinary Technical Assistance Unit. This reflects the increased expectations from our society, by our society, from all of those who form part of our public administration. These standards of conduct and accountability must be enforced not only by government, but also through the work of our legislature and judiciary. Individuals also have access to statutory creations like ombudsman and the many Chapter 9 institutions which all in South Africa may call upon to support and strengthen our democracy. Chairperson, Program Director, I would offer that bold enforcement and utilization of these mechanisms would result in greater accountability from government. Thank you.
One. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is the one who just advised me on how to do this. I'm not taking his seat. He usually sits above everybody else in Parliament. Today, no, it's a dialogue. Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaki Seroke. I really appreciate the opportunity to welcome you where I work, and accompanied by my own grey heads there, led by Usheng and other members who are present here. We're really glad that you recognize this as your space as well. That as public representatives who operate from here, we do not monopolize this space. We are absolutely excited that you chose to come and have what you call constitutional dialogue in this area here. And when I thought what I should say about this dialogue, now I read somewhere someone's claiming that dialogue is what happens when you interact, that your views might be completely embraced, amended, or completely rejected. So when you enter dialogue that way, you come out of it better. When you anticipate that your views might be completely accepted, amended, and or completely rejected. Because it's not an event. It's an ongoing story that will change both or all of us who are engaged in that dialogue. It's a very useful attitude I want to maintain. When we look back at the last 25 years, perhaps, it is interesting that the architecture, the design of the system that we created, the judiciary, the parliament that gave birth to the executive, and the institutions that support democracy, and the so-called fourth sector, the media, and the people, organized or not organized. It is in the dynamic interaction of this relationship that the vision that is contained in the Constitution survives to date. Ndate Pijana raised fascinating and very problematic headaches in the course of these 25 years. And it is appropriate indeed that we also do a little bit of that. And what I liked that I want to draw from what we are saying is what we learned from one of the people who came to South Africa who worked for Shell and was invited by Professor Odendaal to teach us scenario planning. And he says, having done work here, went elsewhere, in conflict-ridden places, when he considers what often brings a resolution to multiple people getting at each other is when those who are engaged in this acknowledge this is our contribution to the state of our affairs. So we have some responsibility to this state of our affairs. So if we do the following things ourselves, we will create conditions for others to do the same. There's something about that that encourages others to similarly acknowledge that, yes, indeed, ourselves, this is what we contributed. Now, as public representatives, from the very beginning, the Constitution that we talk about is replete with references to the necessity for people participation and engagement, the necessity to consult them. I particularly like the section of local government that speaks about the reasons for the existence of local government. But the laws that flow from this, that describes, for example, a municipality as constituting the councillors, the officials, and the people in that jurisdiction. So together they constitute a council. So if that municipality is to succeed, the people, the councillors, the public representative, and the officials must work well together. Each must do their part to bring about a realization. If anywhere in our country you say a municipality worked well, then you will see the contribution of each of those, if at all. If there's a mess in there, you will also see the mess of each of these role players there. This is a holistic picture that I'm trying to paint to suggest that this is an important timing of this dialogue. We are at the sixth beginnings of the term. Parliament is about to finalize its strategy. And as part of this process, on behalf of these members of Parliament who are here, for example, that we have been engaging with the institutions that support democracy, in fact, all of them who were present here the other day in meetings with the Speaker, to talk about what has been happening, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what can we do differently. Because you constitute a critical part of what ought to happen to bring about the vision that is contained in our Constitution. You were created because those who created this Constitution, we had the privilege to constitute part of those, was what we anticipated that the popo would hit the fan. And if that happens, what should happen? And so you have seen some of these institutions stepping in and making profound observations that the Constitutional Court in certain instances has confirmed. The Constitutional Court and courts in general themselves have stepped in to prevent the nonsense from happening. And so, in an interesting way, what I'm suggesting is that our reflections about failure of the last 25 years, we must do it in a holistic manner. We have a responsibility as critical stakeholders, as public representatives, to place before people the practical meaning of the Constitution, so that they can themselves better defend it. Maya Angelou says, know better, do better. And so part of the responsibility for making people, mfundisis, who are here, your congregations there, and others who are sports leadership who are here, and others who run other organizations there. What responsibility do you have you exercised to create conditions for many more people to be sharp enough to understand their constitutional responsibility to defend not the Constitution necessarily, but the vision the Constitution points out towards and contributes towards its realization. The construction that is required of us to do that, to build the Constitution provides a framework. Says this is the path you must go. So if any of us takes a wrong direction, it is our collective responsibility to call them back. Those who are inside here and those who are outside. I'm often standing on top of a truck outside the gates of Parliament there to receive memoranda. And on behalf of Parliament and these members who are here, I say, if what's contained in this memorandum is not already partly being dealt with in Parliament, then you must throw us all out of here. Because indeed, some of the things they are saying sometimes are already being debated and discussed in committees. to some extent. So the pressure that comes out from people stepping in there from outside is a critical contribution to keeping us in the right direction, pulling us from the detours we may be taking and so on, because without that, that's also constitute a violation of the Constitution, if I may put it that way, that we equally have a responsibility to provide support to people, to educate them, so that jwale ka Basotho ha ba bua ba re ha e ya baneng ya shwa moetlo ha o ya baneng wa fela. In other words, good practices when go to the young, I'm summarizing in a strange way, these practices disappear, are no longer used, are no longer appropriate. Some of them are well tested, have proven correct in many instances. And so the challenge that we have is firstly those of us inside here as public representatives to live to the affirmations that we undertook here and those who undertook an oath to do that. But we are but mere individuals. There's 490 of us here. Okay. Our ability to operate most effectively is when we have a dynamic relationship with people outside of Parliament. And this is one of the reasons why I appreciate this dialogue. Because as I say, we didn't just have that dialogue with institutions that support democracy. We are in the middle of what we call the Speakers Forum. Parliament Speaker and Deputy Speaker, Chairperson and Deputy Chairperson, and officials, senior officials from here and from the 9 provinces to discuss what has happened in the past, in the actions of the legislatures. Have we done our work properly? What has been done that needs to be followed up to improve the work we are doing? Is our collaboration where it ought to be in order to fulfill people's desires out there? And so the outcome of this dialogue, part of it must inform that. You will hear us from those forums and when we alert to you that this is what we have agreed we are going to do to carry out the mandate you sent us to do here. And in a sense, dialogue also gains in significance. Yes, no. For dialogue to really have the biggest impact is when we leave this place here to say, what can we do differently today onwards, having heard the different views expressed here? What is it? What is the 1 or 2 things that we can do differently to realize the objectives we want to achieve as contained in our Constitution? Thank you very much for privileging us with your presence in this institution. We hope we share the same.